The sound came first, sharp, sudden, and wrong. A plate shattering against tile can cut straight through a room's noise the way thunder splits a sky. The diner went silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I looked up from across the table at my son, Evan. He froze too, his little hands around his glass of soda. For a second, nobody breathed. The man at the next table was standing, his face red, veins tight against his neck. The waitress, barely out of college, stood a few feet away, soup dripping down her sleeve. The bowl she'd carried now lay in pieces at her feet. All I asked, the man barked, was for it to be hot. How hard is that? The girl tried to stammer out an apology, but her voice trembled like a thin wire. She was small, with tired eyes and an apron stained from a long shift. She reached for a towel, whispering, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get another." "Forget it," he snapped, loud enough that even the cook behind the counter stopped clanging pans. Evan's eyes darted between them, then back to me. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. That silent look hit me harder than the sound of the plate. I'd seen that kind of anger before. Years working construction, you see men lose control over nothing. A wrong coffee order, a bad day, an ego bruise. But watching someone throw something at another human being, especially someone just trying to earn a paycheck, hits different when your kid's sitting across from you. For a moment, I did what everyone else did. I froze. The room waited for someone else to fix it. But that's the thing about silence. It can either keep the peace or protect the wrong person. I felt something settle heavy in my chest. I slid my chair back. The scrape of wood on tile sounded louder than I expected. The man turned his head. So did the waitress. So did everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked toward them, calm, steady. Years of being a father had taught me that shouting only feeds chaos. "That's enough," I said. The man blinked at me, caught off guard. "What?" I nodded toward the floor. "She's working. You don't get to throw things at her." "She brought it cold," he said, puffing himself up. "I paid for it." "I'll pay your bill," I interrupted. "All of it. Just leave her alone." He stared, then let out a short, ugly laugh. "Who the hell do you think you are?" I didn't answer right away. I could feel every pair of eyes in the diner pressing on the back of my neck. The waitress stood frozen, hand trembling around the towel. "Just a dad having dinner," I said. "And a man who doesn't want his son learning the wrong kind of lesson tonight." The man opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then shut it again. Something in my tone, or maybe the quiet around us, drained the fight out of him. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his coat, and left. The doorbell chimed, and the room exhaled. The waitress crouched down to gather the broken plate, hands shaking. I knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded too fast, blinking back tears. "Yes, sir. I'm fine. Thank you." I helped her pick up the last piece, careful not to touch the shards. "Don't call me sir," I said softly. "Just glad you're all right." When I stood again, Evan was watching me with a look I hadn't seen before, part confusion, part awe. Kids don't always understand the words, but they see the meaning. I paid both checks at the counter, left a tip that felt right, and walked my son out into the cool night air. We didn't talk for a while. The parking lot was quiet except for the hum of traffic on the highway nearby. The air smelled faintly of rain, that clean, metallic scent that comes before a storm. When we reached the truck, Evan finally asked, "Dad, weren't you scared he'd hit you or something?" I thought about that. "A little," I said honestly. "But sometimes doing nothing teaches the wrong thing." He looked down, kicking a pebble across the asphalt. "You didn't yell. You just stopped him." "Yeah," I said, unlocking the door. "Yelling doesn't make you strong, kid. Staying calm does." He nodded, quiet again. We got in the truck, the old engine coughing before it settled into its usual rumble. I turned on the headlights, and for a moment, the glow reflected off the diner windows. Inside, the waitress was still wiping the counter, trying to pretend her hands weren't shaking. As I pulled onto the road, I caught my son's reflection in the rearview mirror. He was still watching that diner fade into the distance, his small face lit by the passing streetlights. That's when I realized this night would stay with him, maybe longer than I'd ever know. And the truth was, it would stay with me too. Most days of my life look the same, and I don't say that with complaint. Routine is where a man keeps his bearings. Mornings start with the old coffee maker coughing to life on my kitchen counter, the same chipped mug, The same place by the window where dawn pushes up behind the line of garages. The apartment we moved into after the divorce isn't fancy, but it's mine. The heat ticks in the baseboards, the pipes knock sometimes, and the porch light still burns out too fast no matter how many times I swap the bulb. But it's steady. Evan knows exactly where his backpack hangs, and where the cereal is, and which small drawer has the Band-Aids, and the screwdriver, and the measuring tape. He likes that, knowing where things go. I do too. I work with my hands. Been doing it most of my life. Officially, my title is maintenance lead at a warehouse outside town. We keep the conveyors running, the forklifts serviced, the lights from flickering, the roof from leaking. Unofficially, I'm the guy people call when something won't start, won't shut off, or won't behave the way it did yesterday. There's a quiet satisfaction in catching the hum of a motor and knowing by the sound whether it's healthy. Metal has a way of talking to you if you've spent enough time listening. So do people, when you're patient and don't push. On my weeks with Evan, I leave the house at 6:15 and tiptoe past his room with the door cracked, the glow-in-the-dark stars he stuck on the ceiling fading out like old promises. I pack his lunch, 2 halves of a turkey sandwich he never eats at the same time, an apple sliced thin because his front tooth is still loose, a note I write on the napkin even if he pretends he's outgrown it. You've got this. Then I nudge him awake, and we move through the house like a small crew with a job to do. Socks, teeth, backpack check, jacket. He tells me facts he's learned about space or prehistoric fish or whatever the Science Channel served him while I was making coffee, and he always says them the same way, like he's reporting directly from mission control. I drive him to school in the truck that rattles, but keeps going. The heater smells like dust for the first 2 minutes. The radio never remembers my presets. On my weeks without him, I still pack 2 halves of a sandwich. I don't know why. Habit's a stubborn thing. I eat both halves by 10 and tell myself it's because the morning was heavy, not because the kitchen felt empty. Divorce doesn't end a family. It just changes its shape in ways you didn't choose. His mother and I do fine, mostly. We trade weekends, trade doctor appointments, trade the little victories and the stubborn colds and the school flyers with bent corners. We keep our voices kind in front of Evan. That's the rule. When we mess up, we fix it quick. The day of his school concert, the one that took us to the diner, started like any other long Thursday. The warehouse felt colder than usual when I clocked in, our breath showing in thin clouds as the big doors rolled up and the first truck backed into Bay 3. Someone had left a pallet angled wrong, and we had to dance the forklift in at a goofy angle to coax it around. The air smelled like cardboard and diesel and a sweetness from the break room, where someone burned a cinnamon candle because it was festive. Ron, who runs second shift, looked like he hadn't slept. He waved me over to a conveyor that had started singing a high metallic whine whenever it changed speed. I pressed a knuckle to the housing and felt it, bearings starting to go. Nothing dramatic. Just the kind of thing that becomes dramatic if you ignore it. We do a lot of triage in that building. You can't fix everything at once. You learn to pick the thing that will fail loudest if you don't touch it. I swapped the bearing while the line crawled at half speed, the belt slick under my hands, metal groaning like it was offended we caught the problem before it got entertaining. When it settled back into the right pitch, Ron let out a long breath and said, "You hear that? That's the sound of not getting yelled at today." "Music," I said, and he clapped my shoulder. Around noon, I called the school to confirm the time for Evan's concert. The secretary put me on hold long enough to listen to 2 full minutes of cheerful flute notes that I think were meant to be ode to joy. When she came back, she told me the second graders would go on at 6:30 and reminded me to bring my own folding chair if I wanted a guaranteed seat. I told her I had a truck. I'd bring 2. She laughed. In my world, if you can tote something, you tote it. If you can hold a door, you hold it. If you can make a room a hair easier for someone else to breathe in, you do that. By 3, I'd signed off on the work orders, wiped a stripe of grease off my cheek with the back of my wrist, and stared at the clock like a boy waiting for summer. There's a feeling you get before your kid does something on stage. It's not pride exactly. Not yet. It's more like a warm current under your ribs reminding you that you get to be someone's anchor. I drove home, changed into a clean flannel Evan calls my concert shirt, because he thinks I look fancy even though it's just soft cotton with 2 chest pockets that never hold anything. We practiced the speech he had to say about the history of the triangle, of all instruments. He hit the line about percussion brings heartbeat to the music with unusual seriousness. I straightened his tie with the trucks on it and told him he looked brave. He said brave and tight are not the same and asked me to loosen the knot. I did. We laughed. We got to the school early because I like early. The gym smelled like floor polish and crayons and that faint, strange perfume of many people gathering in one place. The risers were set up, the little metal music stands all at different heights because the music teacher is an optimist. Evan found his spot between two kids he knows from soccer and gave me a thumbs up with the kind of restraint that lets you keep your cool in front of your peers. His mother waved from the other side of the room. We nodded. It was a good nod, one that said we were on the same team where it counted. He did fine. Better than fine. He said his line about the triangle like it was the Declaration of Independence, and when he struck the instrument, it rang clear and bright above the squeaky clarinets. I felt that private kind of joy fathers get when their children do something small with large effort. Afterward, he wanted a burger. There's a fancy place near the school we can't afford on Thursdays, so we headed to the diner with the blue neon sign that always flickers the R so it reads Dine. I like the way the bell on its door rings. I like the way the counter is worn smooth where the regulars lean. I like that they don't rush you. It's a simple place. That matters to me. We slid into our booth. The vinyl cracked, but didn't pinch. Evan ordered a cheeseburger and asked for pickles on the side because he likes to build things his way. I ordered a meatloaf special I've ordered since I was younger than some of the waiters. That's when the night took its sudden left turn. The crash, the shout, the soup turning into a weapon that missed but still hurt. You already know that part. The moment where a room chose to stay quiet and I couldn't. Here's the part you don't know. After we drove home and I tucked Evan in, after his questions about fear and calm and why men act the way they do, after I sat in the living room with the radio low and the lamp throwing a small pool of light like a campfire, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd left something unfinished. Not the confrontation. That ended clean. But the girl's face, the way she nodded too quickly and called me sir and bent to gather the pieces like it was her fault for catching them, wouldn't leave me. I kept seeing her sleeve dark with soup, the trembling hand, the manager peeking from the kitchen and then choosing not to step out until it was safe. I thought about my father. He ran a repair shop so small it was basically a garage with a sign. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he said things that stuck. Once, when I was Evan's age, we were at a hardware store and the man at the register made a joke about the woman ahead of us being slow, like maybe money handled differently in those hands. My father didn't argue or grandstand. He just asked the man, quiet as rain, "Would you want someone to talk to your mother that way?" The clerk went pale and stopped joking. We walked out carrying a bag of nails and a little more air in our lungs. Dad never called it a lesson, but it was. Around 11 I stood, rinsed my mug, and stared at the sink like the porcelain basin might offer advice. It didn't. I dried my hands on the towel with the coffee cup stitched on it. Evan's idea of a birthday gift, picked with his mother, and I made a decision I couldn't defend with logic. I set my keys by the door for morning. I told myself I needed breakfast before a long Friday at the warehouse. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I wanted to look that young waitress in the eye when the room wasn't watching. I wanted to make sure she was okay in the way people say they are when they're not. I wanted, if I'm being honest, to show my son that standing up doesn't end when the noise dies. Sometimes it starts then. I slept lighter than usual, woke before my alarm, and listened to the building come alive. Pipes tapping, someone's radio somewhere down the hall murmuring the morning news, a car starting, the faint hiss of the radiator breathing. I made coffee. The kitchen smelled like warmth and habit. Evan's sneakers were by the door, toes pointed outward, ready to step into the day. I poured my mug, took one sip, and grabbed my jacket. The bell over the diner door would ring in about 15 minutes. I'd step into the quiet that belongs to the early hour before the rush began. I didn't know what I was going to say. I only knew I didn't want to leave yesterday frozen as the last thing that happened in that room. I wanted to finish the thing a man starts when he says, "That's enough." The diner looked different in daylight. Most places do. The same vinyl booths, the same checkered floor, but in the morning light it felt softer, less like a scene frozen in someone's memory and more like a place that was still trying to make a living. When I pushed through the door, the bell above it gave its usual tired jingle. A man at the counter stirred his coffee without looking up from the paper, and an older couple sat near the window sharing pancakes the way they probably had for decades. The waitress who'd been there last night wasn't on the floor yet, and for a second, I wondered if she'd quit. Then I saw her, over by the corner table, tying her apron. She moved carefully, like someone still nursing invisible bruises. Her hair was tied back, but a few loose strands fell forward as she bent to pick up a stack of menus. When she straightened and saw me, her smile flickered, unsure, polite, but real enough to make me stop pretending I'd come here just for breakfast. "Morning," she said softly. "You were here last night, right?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Couldn't stay away from the meatloaf, I guess." She gave a small laugh, the kind people make when they're still deciding if they trust the moment. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." I slid into a booth. The seat creaked beneath me, familiar and forgiving. As she poured, the smell of freshly brewed coffee rose between us. She set the cup down gently, like she was afraid of another crash. "You doing all right?" I asked. The words came out quieter than I intended. She hesitated, looking toward the door as if to make sure her boss wasn't nearby. "I'm fine," she said, then shook her head. "No, that's not true. I'm better than last night." I waited. I've learned that sometimes the best way to help someone talk is to stop filling the silence for them. She leaned her hip against the edge of the table. "That man comes in every few weeks. Always complains about something. Usually it's just words, but," she trailed off. "Never thought he'd actually throw something." I felt that old weight in my chest again. Anger, pity, the urge to fix something that didn't belong to me. "You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of thing," I said. She shrugged. "People say that a lot. But bills don't care about what you should or shouldn't have to deal with." That line landed heavier than it should have. I looked at her hands, red around the knuckles, probably from hot water and sanitizer. She had a faint burn on her wrist. She noticed me noticing and tucked her sleeve down. "Name's Claire," she said finally. "I didn't get to say that last night." "Tom," I replied. "And the kid with me was my son, Evan." She smiled. "He looked scared for you." I would have been. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong and slightly burnt, the kind that wakes you up twice, once from the heat, once from the truth behind it. I admitted. But sometimes fear's just the body's way of asking if you're still paying attention. Her eyes softened. "Well, I wanted to thank you. Most people didn't even look up." "I know," I said. "But my son did. And I didn't want him thinking silence was the right kind of man to be." For a moment, we didn't speak. The morning sun stretched across the diner floor, catching the dust motes in lazy patterns. She refilled my cup without asking, the kind of small grace that says more than any words could. "Your manager treat you okay after?" I asked. She nodded. "He apologized. Said he should have stepped in sooner. Gave me today's shift shorter if I wanted. But honestly, I need the hours." There was nothing heroic to say to that, just the quiet truth of how most people live. So I left a 20 on the table for a $5 coffee, signed the receipt, and stood up. Before I walked out, she called after me. "Hey, Tom." I turned. She was standing in the same spot she'd been humiliated in the night before. But now, she looked a little taller. "Your son," she said. "He's lucky." "You know that?" I gave a small nod. "So am I." Outside, the air was crisp. The early sun threw gold across the hood of my truck, and the city hadn't quite found its noise yet. I leaned against the door, watching through the diner window as Claire moved from table to table, smiling like someone who decided not to let one man's anger decide her worth. When I got back in the truck, Evan's lunchbox was still on the passenger seat where he'd forgotten it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and smiled. Maybe life was a lot like that. We all forget something important now and then, but someone else always finds it, holds on to it, and brings it back when it matters most. I looked at the diner one more time before pulling out. I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. But that morning, I knew this. Not all rescues happen in the heat of the moment. Some happen quietly. The next day, over coffee that tastes like honesty. By Monday, the story wasn't mine anymore. I didn't even know it was a story until my phone buzzed at work during lunch. Ron leaned over from across the table, holding his phone out. "Hey, Tom," he said, grinning. "That you?" On his screen was a grainy video, 30 seconds, shot from across the diner. You could see the man throwing the plate, the waitress flinching, and me standing up, stepping between them. Someone had filmed the whole thing. The caption read, "Real man defends waitress from angry customer flexed biceps, #respect, #hero dad." My stomach dropped. The video had already been shared hundreds of times, likes and comments rolling in faster than I could read them. I hadn't even known anyone was recording. Ron laughed. Man, this thing's blowing up. You're a legend. I forced a smile. I just wanted to eat dinner. He shrugged, still amused. Well, now the internet wants to eat you. By the time I clocked out, the view count had doubled. Someone from a local radio station had tagged me. Apparently, a guy from my high school recognized me and gave them my name. My inbox had messages from people I hadn't talked to in years. Proud of you, brother. We need more men like you. My dad would have done the same. At first, it felt strange but harmless. Then came the requests, small podcasts, local news, even a morning talk show that wanted me and the waitress to share our story. That phrase, our story, rubbed at me like sandpaper. Because it wasn't supposed to be a story. It was a moment. A single, ordinary moment that happened because silence felt heavier than speaking. That night, I sat in the living room with Evan, scrolling through the comments. He was excited. Kids see viral fame as something magical, like being picked up by a big wave. Dad, you're trending, he said, half laughing. Everyone's saying you're a hero. I looked at the screen. Thousands of comments. Most were kind. Some were angry at the man who threw the plate. A few twisted the story into something political or moralistic. And one said, people only act like this when they want attention. Cameras make heroes these days. That one stuck. I set the phone down. You know, kid, I said quietly, sometimes people see 10 seconds of a thing and think they know the whole of it. But they don't see what came before or after. Evan frowned. You mean like, when I forget to show you the part of my report card that's good? I smiled. Exactly like that. He thought about it, then asked, does it bother you? A little, I admitted. Because I didn't do it for likes. I did it because it was the right thing to do. He nodded slowly. That serious look he gets when he's turning something over in his mind. I know. I was there. That line, I was there, cut right through the noise. I switched the phone off. The quiet that followed felt like closing a door after too much wind. The next day, the diner owner called. Tom, listen, he said, his voice carrying the polite tone of someone who'd practiced it. We've had reporters calling all morning. They want to talk to you. And Claire. Reporters? I asked. Yeah. They say it's a good story. Local hero stands up for Waitress. I sighed. I don't think she wants that. Well, she didn't come in today, he admitted. Said she needed some time. But if you talk to them, maybe say something nice about the place. Could help business. I didn't answer right away. The sound of machinery hummed around me. Forklifts, conveyor belts, the metallic rhythm of normal life still moving. But inside, something felt off balance. After work, I drove by the diner. Claire's car wasn't there. Through the window, I saw another waitress wiping down the counter, and a young couple sitting in the same booth where it all happened. The space looked smaller now, like a photograph that had been cropped. When I got home, I found an envelope on my porch. My name, written in careful handwriting. No return address. Inside was a note. Tom, I wanted to thank you again. The attention's been a lot. People keep asking me for interviews, like it's something I should want. I just wanted to work, not relive that night. But your son, he looked proud of you. Maybe that's what matters most. Claire. There was also a $5 bill inside. I stared at it for a long time before realizing what it was, the tip from my coffee that morning. She'd found it too much and mailed it back. The smallness of that gesture hit me harder than the video ever could. That weekend, a local paper ran a short article anyway. Warehouse worker defends waitress in act of kindness. There was a still frame from the video, my face mid-sentence, caught between calm and tension. The comments poured in again. I didn't read most of them this time, but one line in the article made me pause. It was from the journalist's closing paragraph. In an age where everyone films, but few act, maybe the quietest men are the ones we should be listening to. I don't know if that writer meant it or just needed a good closing line, but it stayed with me. Because I wasn't trying to be quiet. I was trying to be decent. And somewhere in all the noise, I realized those two things aren't the same, but they should be. That Sunday evening, I was helping Evan with his homework when he asked out of nowhere, Dad, are you famous now? I chuckled. Famous doesn't last long, buddy. Usually not past next week. But everyone's talking about it. I put the pencil down and met his eyes. Then here's what I want you to remember. Doing something good doesn't need an audience. If people notice, that's fine. But you don't do it for them. You do it because it's what you can live with later when you look in the mirror. He nodded, then after a pause asked, so you're not mad about the video? I thought about it. The truth was complicated. No, I said finally. But I wish they'd filmed what happened after. What happened after? He asked. I smiled faintly. A woman got back up, wiped her hands, and went to work again. That's the real story. He didn't answer, just smiled in that quiet way kids do when something clicks deep inside them. That night, after he went to bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The autumn air carried that faint scent of wet leaves and streetlight warmth. My phone buzzed again, a new message request, another journalist, but I didn't open it. I slipped it into my pocket and looked up at the sky instead. Somewhere out there, Claire was probably trying to get back to her normal. And maybe, so was I? By the time the buzz died down, a few weeks had passed. The world had already moved on to a new video, someone rescuing a kitten from a storm drain, or a stranger paying for groceries. That's how the internet works. Outrage and admiration share the same shelf life. I was glad for it. But one person hadn't moved on. Me. That letter from Claire sat on my dresser, folded twice, soft around the edges from being opened too many times. I didn't know why I kept reading it. Maybe because it reminded me that kindness isn't something you finish, it's something you keep showing up for. One night, while Evan was doing homework at the table, I looked up and asked, "You remember the waitress from the diner?" He nodded without looking up. "The one you helped?" "Yeah," I said. "Her name's Claire." He smiled. "She was nice. She gave me an extra cherry for my soda." That made me laugh. "Yeah, that sounds like her." I paused for a moment, turning the idea over in my mind before saying it out loud. "What do you think about dropping off something for her? Just to make sure she's doing all right." Evan's pencil stopped moving. "Like what?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a card. Or something for the holidays." He thought about it, then nodded. "Can we get one of those thank you candles? The ones that smell like cookies." "Cookies, huh?" I said. "You trying to bribe the universe with sugar?" He grinned. "It usually works." The next evening, we went to the store. Evan took his time picking out a candle, sniffing each one, wrinkling his nose, and giving little reviews like a seasoned critic. "This one smells like my backpack," he said, holding up a lavender something. "This one smells like Grandma's car." Finally, he found one that made him smile. "This one smells like warm bread." He handed it to me with a little nod, serious and proud. "This is the one." We bought the candle and a small card with a painted sunrise on it. At home, I wrote, "For the days that start hard and still find their light. Thank you for reminding us what grace looks like when the world isn't watching. T&E." Evan signed his name with big looping letters, then drew a tiny triangle next to it. "That's from my concert," he explained. "She was there after." I smiled. Kids remember things we don't realize they're holding on to. The next morning, we drove by the diner before school. It was early, not even 7. The neon open sign flickered awake in the window. The same cook was visible through the pass window, flipping bacon on the grill. I spotted Claire at the counter, tying her apron. We parked across the street. "Want to come in?" I asked. Evan shook his head. "You go? I'll watch from here." I wanted to be her surprise. I smiled and tousled his hair. "Deal." The bell chimed as I stepped inside. Claire looked up, and a smile touched her face, small, tired, but real. "Hey, Tom. Haven't seen you in a bit." "Yeah," I said, holding up the small bag. "Just wanted to drop something off." She wiped her hands on her apron and tilted her head. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "That's kind of the point." I handed her the bag. She peeked inside, saw the candle, and laughed quietly. "Smells like warm bread." "Yeah, that was my son's pick." Her eyes softened at the mention of Evan. "He's a good kid." "He's trying," I said. "We both are." She took a breath and set the bag on the counter, tracing the rim of the candle jar with her finger. "You know, the night after it all happened, I thought about quitting," she admitted. "I even looked up jobs in another town. I didn't want to come back here." I listened, but then I thought about how you stood up, and your son watching, and I realized maybe this job isn't about the food. Maybe it's about the people who walk in. Her voice wavered just slightly, and she laughed it off. "Guess I just needed to see that not everyone's cruel." I felt something warm rise in my chest. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter. Gratitude, maybe, that a moment of decency could still matter after the noise had faded. "Take care of yourself, Claire," I said. "The world needs more people who don't give up on it." She smiled, but there was a glint in her eyes. "You too, Tom. And tell your son, he was braver than he knows." I nodded. turned to leave, and caught sight of Evan watching from the truck, waving from behind the windshield. I waved back. When I climbed in, he asked, "Did she like it?" "She did," I said. "And she said thank you for the triangle." He grinned. "Told you the candle would work." We drove the rest of the way to school in easy silence. The morning sun filtered through the trees, scattering gold on the dashboard. Evan hummed quietly, something from his concert, I think, while I thought about how small acts echo longer than we think. When we pulled up to the school, he unbuckled and turned to me. "Dad, yeah. Do you think she'll remember us?" I looked at him, his hair sticking up, his tie slightly crooked from where he'd insisted on wearing it again, just because. "Maybe," I said, "but that's not the point." He frowned. "Then what's the point?" "The point," I said, "is to make sure you remember." He nodded slowly, then smiled the way kids do when they've been given something bigger than they can name yet. As he ran off toward the school doors, backpack bouncing against his shoulders, I sat there for a moment longer. Watching him disappear into the crowd of kids reminded me of the one truth I've been learning over and over. Being a man isn't about fighting or fame. It's about what you do when nobody's looking, especially when your kid still is. 2 weeks later, I was halfway through fixing a loading dock sensor when Ron came running up with his phone again. "Tom," he said, breathless, "your diner lady just posted something. People are sharing it like crazy." I wiped my hands on a rag and frowned. "What diner lady?" He grinned. "The waitress. Claire. She made a post about you and your son. Man, it's everywhere." My stomach tightened. I took his phone. The post wasn't dramatic or flowery. It was just a photo, the candle we'd given her, flickering on the diner counter next to a mug of coffee, and a short paragraph that said, "A few weeks ago, a stranger stood up for me when no one else did." I thought the story ended there, but this morning, his son left me a candle that smells like warm bread. I keep it near the register to remind me that kindness has a sound. It's quiet, steady, and doesn't ask for thanks. I stared at the screen for a long time. The picture wasn't special, just a diner, a flame, a note in my handwriting half visible beside it. But something about it hit people. Maybe because it didn't preach or posture. It just was. Within hours, there were hundreds of comments. Strangers tagging friends. People sharing their own small stories. Someone paying for a coffee. Someone holding a door. Someone forgiving a rude customer. One comment stood out. "This story made me text my dad. We haven't talked in 2 years." I showed it to Ron, who let out a low whistle. "Guess you started something, man." I shook my head. I didn't start anything. I just didn't stay quiet. That night, the diner was busier than I'd ever seen it. I stopped by after work, mostly out of curiosity. Cars filled the lot. Inside, people laughed, talked, and waited for seats that weren't available. And there, right near the cash register, sat that same candle, still burning soft and golden. Claire saw me before I even got to the counter. Her face broke into a surprised smile. "You saw it?" "I did," I said. "You didn't have to post that." "I wanted to," she replied. "Not for attention. For gratitude." The manager came out from the kitchen, a tall man with a nervous smile. "You're the guy, right?" he said. "Tom, I owe you a thank you. That night scared me. I should have stepped in sooner. I've been trying to do better since." I nodded. "That's all anyone can do." He gestured toward the packed tables. "We've had a full house every night this week. People say they come because they want to eat at the place where something good happened." I looked around at the crowd. Families, older couples, a group of teenagers laughing over milkshakes, and felt that quiet warmth settle somewhere behind my ribs. Claire poured me a coffee without asking. "On the house," she said, smiling. I leaned on the counter, watching the light dance against the candle glass. "You know, that post of yours might have done more good than that video ever did." She nodded. "Maybe, but it's because of what you did first." I took a slow sip of coffee. "No," I said. "It's because of what you did after. You showed people that grace doesn't stop where the shouting ends." She smiled at that. A real smile this time, not the tired kind you wear through pain. A man from a nearby table stood up and walked over, holding his check. "Excuse me," he said. "You're him, right? The guy from the video?" I sighed inwardly. "Yeah, that's me." He nodded. "Just wanted to say thanks. Not because of what you did there, because my boy saw that clip. Said it made him want to help out the new kid at school who eats alone. So yeah, thanks." I didn't know what to say. I just shook his hand. He smiled, paid his bill, and left with his son, a tall, shy kid who gave me a small wave before following his dad out. For a while, I sat there with my coffee, thinking about how fast things spread and how sometimes, for all the noise in the world, the right things still echo. When I got home that night, Evan was drawing at the table, crayons everywhere, serious expression, tongue pressed against the corner of his mouth. "What are you working on, bud?" I asked. He looked up. "A picture for the diner." He slid it over. It was a simple drawing. Me, the waitress, and him, all smiling under the blue neon sign. In the middle, he'd drawn the candle, bright yellow, bigger than everything else. "She says it's about kindness," he said, "so I made it the biggest thing." I smiled. "I think you're right." We taped the drawing to the fridge. It's still there today, colors fading, edges curling, but it stays. Because that picture isn't just a memory. It's a map. A reminder that decency isn't loud, and you don't need to wait for permission to be the person who stands up. A few days later, I went back to the diner one more time. The crowd had thinned, the buzz slowing down to normal life again. Claire was refilling coffee cups, humming under her breath. When she saw me, she waved, but I didn't stay long. I just left a note on the counter before walking out. "If the candle ever burns out, don't worry. The lights already found other places to live." And that was enough. Winter came early that year, cold enough to make the air sting and the breath hang white above the ground. The kind of cold that makes you think more than you talk. Evan loved it. He'd come running out after school, cheeks pink, shoes covered in slush, grinning like the world was brand new every time he saw frost on the grass. He'd shout, "It's snowing again," even when it was just the wind stirring up old flakes. I'd watch from the porch, coffee steaming in my hand, and think, he's still seeing joy where most people see inconvenience. We hadn't been back to the diner in a few weeks. Life had folded back into its quiet rhythm. Work, school, bills, weekends. The world had stopped calling me a hero, and I was glad. I was never built for spotlights. Some men need noise to feel alive. I've always needed silence. Still, the story lingered. Every now and then, someone at the warehouse would bring it up again. A coworker clapping me on the back, or a driver joking, "Better be careful, or Tom will go viral again." It was always in good humor, but I'd just smile and say, "Hope not." The truth was, I hadn't stopped thinking about that night. Not the video, not the headlines, not the applause, but the moment itself. The seconds before I stood up. The silence that stretched across that diner like a test. That was the real part. The part that never made the news. And sometimes, when things got quiet, I'd ask myself something simple. Why was it so hard for everyone else to move? I didn't ask that in judgment. I asked it because I knew that fear, that hesitation. It's the same thing that keeps a man from apologizing when he's wrong or from saying "I'm proud of you" before it's too late. It's the same thing that lets cruelty grow, not because we agree with it, but because we don't stop it. That's what I wanted Evan to understand. Not that his dad had been brave, but that courage doesn't live in muscles or fists. It lives in the decision to do something when everyone else looks away. A few nights before Christmas, Evan and I were decorating the small tree in our living room. It was our tradition to use the same mix of mismatched ornaments every year: old glass bulbs from my parents, a wooden train he'd made in kindergarten, a few plastic stars from a dollar store bin. He hung a small triangle-shaped ornament near the top, a nod to his concert, to the night that started it all. "Think she'd like this?" he asked. "Claire." He nodded. "I think she would," I said. "But I think she already has her own lights now." He smiled at that and kept working, humming some tune that was half carol, half invention. After we finished, we sat on the couch with the glow of the tree painting the room gold and green. Outside, snow was falling, slow, quiet, like it respected the moment. "Dad," Evan said softly. "Yeah, bud. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." He hesitated, then looked up at me. "Were you scared that night? Like really scared?" I thought about lying, about brushing it off. But he deserved the truth. "Yeah," I said. "I was." He seemed surprised. "But you didn't look scared." "I was," I repeated. "You just didn't see it. Being scared doesn't mean you can't do something anyway. It just means you care about what happens next." He nodded slowly, then leaned against my arm. "I think I get it now." We sat there for a long while, just watching the tree lights blink in slow rhythm. A few days later, we went back to the diner. Not because we planned to, but because it felt right. The candles still burned on the counter. Claire smiled when she saw us and waved us over. Still smells like warm bread, she said, laughing. Good to see it's holding up, I replied. Evan beamed. We brought you something. He handed her a small box. Inside was a simple ornament shaped like a heart, carved from wood. We'd made it the night before. She turned it in her hands and smiled. This is beautiful, she said. Thank you. Evan grinned. It's so you don't forget Christmas kindness. Claire looked at me, eyes shining just a little. You've got a good kid, Tom. Trying to raise one, I said. She put the ornament beside the candle, right there on the counter for everyone to see. Then she looked at both of us and said quietly, You know, it's funny. That night used to be the worst one I ever had. Now, it's the one that reminds me why I stayed. I didn't have words for that, so I just nodded. Sometimes gratitude doesn't need an answer. Driving home, the snow had thickened. The wipers brushed slow arcs across the windshield, and the heater hummed low. Evan was half asleep in the seat beside me, his head tilted toward the window. The road stretched quiet and white ahead of us. Streetlights turned the snowflakes into tiny sparks, each one visible for a second before melting into the dark. I thought about Claire's candle, still burning, and realized something simple but solid. Goodness doesn't end where you leave it. It keeps moving, passed along like warmth in cold air. And maybe that's the point of all of it. Not the act itself, but the echo it leaves behind. When we pulled into our driveway, Evan stirred awake. We home? Yeah, I said softly. He blinked and smiled sleepily. I like that diner. It feels like something good happened there. Something did, I said. And it's still happening. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. I turned off the truck, let the silence sit for a second, then reached over and squeezed his shoulder. You did good that night too, you know, I said. You watched, you understood, and you remembered. That's how the world changes. One person paying attention. He nodded, already half asleep again. I sat there for another minute, the engine ticking as it cooled, and thought about my father, about that day in the hardware store, about how a quiet correction had turned into a lifetime of knowing when to stand up. Now it was my turn to pass that lesson on. Sometimes I still drive past that diner on my way home from work. The sign still flickers. The R still blinks out every few seconds, so it reads Dine. I don't stop often anymore. I don't need to. The candle's probably burned down by now. Maybe Claire replaced it. Maybe she didn't. But every time I pass that window and see people sitting there, laughing, eating, living their lives, I feel something steady inside me, like the hum of an old truck that still runs no matter the mileage. People called me a hero once. They still do sometimes. I always tell them the same thing. I wasn't brave. I was just tired of pretending that silence is peace. The truth is, courage rarely looks cinematic. Most of the time, it looks like a man setting down his coffee, standing up when no one else will, and choosing to be kind even when nobody's filming. That night at the diner didn't make me famous. It made me honest. It reminded me that my son is always watching, and that what I teach him in those small, ordinary moments will outlast anything I ever say. We live in a world that celebrates the loud, but I've learned that decency, real, grounded decency, makes its own kind of music. It doesn't shout. It hums quietly under everything, steady as a heartbeat. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. In the sound of a plate being set gently on a table instead of thrown, in the voice of a man saying that's enough, in the small exhale that follows when the room remembers what respect feels like. That's the sound I want my son to grow up hearing. Because at the end of the day, being a man isn't about how hard you can hit or how much noise you can make. It's about how gently you can hold the world when it starts to crack. Would you have stood up that night? Or would you have stayed seated, hoping someone else would? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, don't just share it. Live it. Because somewhere, someone's watching, learning what kind of person it's okay to be.